Welcome back to BTR Boxing Podcast Network. I'm your host, Sean, and I'm joined, as always, by Lukie for this first fight preview of 2025. It's Jai Opetaia and David Nyika for the IBF Cruiserweight Championship of the World. I'm actually looking forward to this fight, Lukie. You know, off the bat here, straight away. I wasn't looking forward to the initial fight, the original fight that was scheduled for Jai Opetaia. But I'm actually looking forward to this one. Like, David Nyika's coming in as a late replacement, and he's actually got a golden opportunity here to upset an apple cart and a gravy train and whatever else you want to label it. That is Jai Opetaia at the moment. He's got a huge opportunity to do this. And he's only had 10 professional fights, with 9 coming by way of knockout, against Jai Opetaia's 26 professional fights. Opetaia, of course, regarded as the best cruiserweight around at the moment. But Nyika, I've been watching him closely over his last few fights, and I've been impressed with him. And I know me and you, Lukie, have had a different conversation on one of our different episodes. And your opinion in this fight is actually slightly different than maybe what most people might think, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Jay's either going to lose or win a very close fight that kind of hurts his stock. Just to get into a breakdown of the fight, because might as well, because, you know, just sitting here. The big issue I see with Nyika is, or with Jay, is he starts fast. He's got good hand speed. But then in the second half of fights, his technique goes and he gets tired. If Nyika kind of reminds me of like a Callum Smith guy. He can't punch like Callum, but I do think he's got a gear that he hasn't shown as a professional. And I think he's going to take this fight into the second half. They're former sparring partners. He was eager to take the fight. He's motivated, confident. I think this is going to just kind of shock people, because Jai Opetaia fits my bill of a really good fighter who's slightly overvalued. He's slightly overrated. And I think part of that is because he's a big puncher. He's kind of crazy and stuff, but then people aren't picking up on the red flags. Against Bradis, he got his jaw broken, I believe. He gets hit sometimes. In some of these fights, they're not the cleanest performances. And this is a guy that knows his tendencies that he's getting in there with. So I'm expecting a very close fight, and I'm expecting a hard fight. If that's not the case, then Jay's a lot better than I think. But I think he's closer to like 20, 25 in pound for pound rankings than 15-8.
Do you think with Opetaia that there's so much hype around him at the moment is because of how he's dispatched of his opponents in recent fights? Is it that's causing the hype around him? I mean, don't get me wrong, I am one of those guys that's kind of jumped on the Opetaia bandwagon and gone, you know, I'm actually really liking this guy. I think he's really good. I think he's actually probably the best cruiserweight around. But I suppose if you break it down as to, you know, when he really broke onto the scene, that first Brady's fight where he had his jaw broken and he overcame that adversity to become the IBF Cruiserweight champion. Following that, his wins were over Jordan Thompson, who was largely untested, Ellie Sorrow, who, again, largely untested, and then a rematch against Marius Bradis, who, for all intents and purposes, was past his best years. Then he gets Jack Massey. Again, I feel that was... Jack Massey was always European level, and I've got a lot of respect for Jack because, you know, I've done a lot of stuff with him in the past for the show. But I've always been quite open about him and where his ceiling is as a fighter. So, is there an argument here that Jai Opetaia is overrated as opposed to actually being this huge ruler of the cruiserweight division? And in fact, there are fighters out there that are actually ready to take him down.
I think that the big overreaction to his career just strictly stems from the fact that he's a guy who the Saudis have gotten behind, and he has exciting fights. So on these cards, you see Jai Opetaia knock people out in exciting ways. He's also really good, right? He is good, but I think that there's a reaction typically to guys that get knockouts and are pretty intimidating, as those are the best guys. I think Zordo's better than him. Personally, I think Zordo's a more talented fighter. And I think that if they were to fight, would underestimate Zordo completely in that fight. But I just think that this is a trap fight. And what I mean by that, I know people throw around in boxing, right? Trap fight and etc. Let me explain it. Think there's a Zordo fight waiting for Jay Opetaia if he wins. And I think this is a guy who's coming to win. And it's built in his hometown where there's probably a lot of creature comforts. Maybe it's not his hometown, but it's like it's somewhere he's comfortable with. So he's more comfortable. He's being treated like a rock star. And these are the fights that can be really hard historically. So I think that this is a fight where don't be surprised if some of Jay Opetaia's perception, to me, it's like Regis Prograis versus Danielito Zarilla. That's the type of fight I'm seeing.
And then we got to look at Nyika and what he brings to the table, Lukie. Like I said before, 10 fights, 9 by way of knockout. Biggest win on his resume, Tommy Capensi, the former light heavyweight fighter, well-known fighter in the light heavyweight division. That was his biggest win in his very last fight. But he's looked good as well so far in his career. And you can say Opetaia has had a better resume. He's fought a legit guy in Marius Bradis, who he's beaten, and he's beaten twice, although there was difficult moments in that, and some of the flaws that you mentioned in terms of going into a second half of a fight against someone who isn't just going to get bowled over by them. And that's no disrespect to any of the guys that Opetaia has fought. They've not been able to withstand the punishment. When you had Brady's in there, twice Brady's caused him problems in both of them fights. Twice he was able to not go anywhere. Like when them punches were landing, he weren't moving. He weren't going anywhere. And because of that, I kind of felt like looking back on it in hindsight, that Opetaia, you know, his punching power can be a little bit overrated, because when you've got a fighter who can take your best shots and carry on coming at you, the confidence levels in the fighter throwing them shots eventually is going to start to decrease. And I think you saw that in the Brady's fights. I think you saw that he started to get a bit more sloppier. His stamina level started to drop. He was leaving himself more open for opportunities. Now, obviously, Nyika's early on in his professional career, and he's got a huge step up at this stage of his career. Is he ready for it? Well, he's being thrown in at the deep end, as they say. And I think he's got the power, from what I've seen, to cause problems for Opetaia. And if Opetaia leaves himself open, it's going to answer some questions as to whether he can also take huge punches. He's really good offensively, Opetaia, but we haven't really had to see a real adverse moment, as in him being knocked down. We've seen him get a broken jaw, and we've seen him overcome that. And that's a huge moment to overcome and be able to get through and win the title. Massive. I'm not saying he hasn't got any heart or determination. He's got it in abundance. But we have yet to see him really get hurt to the point where his senses are scrambled. He's moving around the ring. He's unsteady on his legs. He's got to come back from a moment like that. I think Nyika's got the power to do that to him. But it's whether mentally Nyika can go in there, take out that sparring partner mentality, and actually go in there and know that, you know, I can hurt this guy, I can put it on him, and I can cause him problems. We don't know what happened behind closed doors at sparring. You know, you always get these conversations before fights with ex-sparring partners where one fighter will say, you know, they did better than the other, or they floored him, or whatever. But we haven't really heard too much of it in this, because it's so late on and it's so much of a quick turnaround for this fight actually happening because of the late replacement. So it leads me to believe that actually we might get something a little bit more than what people are expecting. And that's why I'm quite happy to be seeing this fight happen. I think it's one that I'm looking forward to start the year. I think it'll be a fight that might not go the distance. I think maybe one fighter's going to stop another. And I think if I'm looking at early predictions for it as we lead up to the fight, I'm anticipating that Opetaia might be able to break down Nyika, and the experience of Opetaia might be able to break him down. But I'm not going to rule out the fact that Nyika could actually upset the apple cart here. And if he did land something significant on him that put him down, or he was able to beat him in this fight, Luque, would then people start to say that Jai Opetaia was an overrated fighter? Would that conversation come in? Because I think there'd be a lot of people that would either say he was an overrated fighter or just say that Nyika was an underrated fighter.
Whenever a fighter loses or has a bad fight, people say dumb stuff. So if that were to happen, of course, people will say, "Oh, he's not good, he's overrated, etc." Because that's all boxing fans do, is they say negative stuff, right? The truth is in the middle. I think he is a little overvalued, but it's more so the machine behind him, big money machine, Saudi, and all that stuff. I don't know, bro. I don't know. It's a difficult proposition, right? When we talk about it, because I look at these fights and I see them the way I see them. And I don't know what the fans see anymore, right? I look at a fight and I used to look at, what was a fight? Shane Mosley and Sergio Mora. I didn't know how that fight was going to go. I was like, man, I can't wait to see this. I don't know how that fight's going to go. I look at these fights now and I kind of see two paths of how the fight goes. So when we start talking overrated, I have to bow out of these conversations because I don't know what people see. You get what I'm saying? Like, I don't know what the fan sees. I don't know what they evaluate. I don't know anymore. And that, so if Opetaia loses, people will say he was never this or that, or Nyika was a hidden gem or whatever. But the truth is, maybe Nyika can only fight Jay Opetaia or Jay Opetaia. I'm not convinced Jay Opetaia is good with movers, to be perfectly honest with you. And I think he needs to he's like a sprinter. He's like Usain Bolt. He has to start fast and his lead has to continue. And I don't know. I think it's a compelling fight. It comes on at an absolutely dreadful time where I live at midnight. But that's my thoughts.
I think with the way fighters are portrayed in this day and age, I think a lot of the problems we have come down to the media, the accessibility to have an opinion now. And I know it's a bit of off-piste of the conversation that we're having, but you know, when you get a fight like this where you've got a guy who's 26-0, he's going into a fight against a guy on paper who's got 10 fights behind him. Yeah, they're ex-sparring partners, and you've seen how good Opetaia's looked in some of his fights. Naturally, you'd sort of favour this individual, but nobody can really say for sure that Nyika isn't a fighter that just hasn't yet to been given the opportunity. He's just a bit more early on in his career than where Opetaia is at the moment, and he's been given a golden opportunity to prove that he actually is a really good fighter by going and winning the IBF Cruiserweight Championship of the world. The problem that social media has provided to the world is that it's given voice to people who have little to no experience within being able to actually interpret a fighter and a fight. So people will look at one fighter in Jai Opetaia, they'll have been raving about him for the last 3 or 4 fights. If he loses this fight, all of a sudden he's on the scrap heap. And that's how fickle boxing fans can actually be. You know, you can sit there one week and say, right, Tyson Fury, for example, is the best heavyweight of this era. As soon as he loses to Alexander Usyk, he was never as good as what we thought he was. It wasn't that. That wasn't the issue. He was just beaten by a better man that wasn't afforded the same level of exposure as what he was. And this could be the same instance here. Jai Opetaia's had a lot of backing behind him because he's been exciting in his fights. So it's given him that sort of push up the ladder, so to speak. And he's taking the opportunities while they're there. And I don't blame him for that. It's not his fault if he is being matched against guys that maybe are going in there with a little bit of fear factor about them, that are maybe intimidated by what Opetaia's brought to the ring. And maybe that's why they've been caught and that's why they've been beaten. But Nyika knows him a little bit better than what these other guys do. And I think, actually, I anticipate that this fight will be an exciting fight. I can't see how this is going to be boring. I hope that, you know, Nyika comes in there and he puts it on Jai Opetaia and he doesn't let Jai Opetaia try and dictate the fight like he does, like a marathon, I said a marathon sprinter. I mean, 100-meter sprinter, like a Usain Bolt, like you said earlier. Opetaia starts like that. Nyika's got to match that pace. If he doesn't match that pace, he can easily get lost in the fight very quickly. And I think it can go one of two ways with this fight. Jai Opetaia will start as he always starts, and he'll be very intimidating. And he'll intimidate Nyika to the point that Nyika won't actually engage because he's maybe a little bit fearful of what's coming back to him. Or the alternative path of this fight would be that Nyika has no fear of Opetaia, and actually he brings out some of the flaws in Opetaia's game and in his makeup that actually Opetaia needs to work on those. It doesn't make him a bad fighter or an overrated fighter if he gets caught and he gets beaten in this fight and loses his title. What it makes him is a fighter that needs to improve, a fighter that could be a better fighter and has now been given the opportunity by losing this fight to become a better fighter. You know, a lot of fighters, a lot of the best fighters out there always say that they learn more from their losses than they do from their wins. And I don't think that is a saying that isn't true. That is a massively true saying. The amount of people that you've seen in the past lose fights and come back to be better fighters, you know, it's some of the legends of the sport. Some of the legends of this sport have done it. Some of the legends of this sport have lost their opening bouts and gone on to become absolute legends, of course. So you cannot sit there and say that if Jai Opetaia loses this fight, is an overrated fighter. The reason I bring it up is I know that if this happens, if that is the eventual outcome of this fight, you know for a fact that social media is going to be littered with those types of comments. And I'm putting it out here to say that you can't say this guy's an overrated fighter if he loses. And you can't say that Nyika coming in at 10-0 with 9 knockouts isn't a danger. He is a danger. He's got a win on his record against a guy who was a legit light heavyweight. You've got to take this guy seriously. This is a really good fight. This is better than the original fight, and it could be an opportunity for Nyika to cause a huge upset. So that is why I'm so passionate about it. I feel like people can quite jump on this fight and, you know, they'll start sort of slating certain individuals and slating if somebody's good enough or not good enough. And I think we've got two guys that have shown that they are legit tough guys who can punch, who hopefully will give us an interesting fight. So that is my very impassioned speech on this particular fight. I said earlier, I think Opetaia wins. I think he does. And the reason I think he would win this fight is I think it would because he's got more experience professionally. He's been in more moments, more adverse moments than what Nyika's been in so far in his career. And I think if anything, that'll put him in better stead. We haven't seen how Nyika reacts to anything yet. If he has got the same level of heart and determination, if not more, then we will see that. But you can only go off what you've seen so far in both of their careers. And at the moment, I'd be favouring Jai Opetaia to retain his title and look towards a Zerdo fight in the future. And that's my take on it. So, Lukie, I'm going to put it back to you now. Any sort of thoughts you want to pick up on the back of that conversation about labelling people overrated and anything in terms of prediction-wise you want to share?
I want to be really rude, and I hate to do this to you, but I just want to go and see my girlfriend right now. So I don't have any thoughts. I just want to go and sit with my girlfriend. So everything you said sounds about right.
And that's one way to put an end to a show, isn't it? Do you know what, guys, ladies and gentlemen, as always, it's a pleasure giving my thoughts and feelings on the fight, and it's always a pleasure to get Lukie on giving his thoughts and feelings on the fights as well. We've kind of gone over it. There's not really much else going on across this week, which is why it's a much shorter preview than normal. So please make sure you are tuning into the other episode that's out there, which is the Boxing Wishlist 2025. That's also been released as well. So please make sure you tune into that. For anybody that wants to tune into any of the other shows, you can do. It's Career Profiles, The Darker Side of Boxing, and the Legendary Nights podcast. But you know what? It's been a pleasure. As always, Lukie, thank you so much for coming on the show. If you've got any comments about anything I've spoke about on this show, about labeling people overrated, who you think is going to win this fight, leave them on Spotify, leave them in the comments section below on the video as well. If you're watching it through Facebook, leave the comments below, please. It's always appreciated to hear other people's opinions. But with that being said, that's everything for this preview. We will be back very shortly as well with previews in the next couple of weeks. We've got a New versus Goodman, of course, coming up. So looking forward to chatting about that one. But that's everything for this one. Thank you so much for listening to the BTR Boxing Podcast Network. We'll see you next time.